All right, so this is a page that's actually just taken from your textbook that walks you through the budgetary process. So I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on this document. Don't feel like you need to copy the entire thing down, but you need to kind of overall, there's some key terms in here that you need to understand. But I also think, like, more importantly, you need to kind of look at the balance of power between the president versus the Congress and whose roles are what. I want to remind you, this is not constitutional. It's constitutional in the sense that Congress controls the purse. It is constitutional that the president has approval. But this whole detailed procedure, this has just been in place since 1974 as a result of what you just read about with the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act. And this is, like they said, very much this idea of the Congress trying to reassert their authority and going, okay, wait a minute, Mr. President, this is what we tell you to do. So that's where all these timelines come from, is from that law. So every year, the president is required to submit a budget to the Congress. One of the things to know about the president's budget is it's not just numbers. It's also a statement of policy requests. So most presidents, since 1974, what they do is they'll say, in order to accomplish X, X, and X, here's how I want to spend my money. And in order to accomplish blah, 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 here's when I want to spend my money. Notice that the budget is actually prepared by the Office of Management and Budget. When we, in the next unit, we will learn about bureaucracy, but this is one of the more important bureaucratic agencies. They work for the president solely. There's nobody that works in OMB is approved by the Senate, so they are part of what's called the Executive Office of the Presidency. Their goal is the president's goal. So what happens is all of the different bureaucratic agencies, the Department of Defense, Social Security, the FBI, Interior, every one of those agencies report to OMB and they say how much money they need. This is much money we need for personnel, literally here's the budget. OMB has to take that and they have to marry that to what the president wants in terms of policy. What has the president said? So ultimately what the president submits is in the president's name, though I will tell you that OMB really does it. OMB, and it's a lot of it depends on their relationship with the president, how involved is the president, but the director of OMB does tend to historically exercise a lot of autonomy. All right, so that gets presented, and then February 15th, Congress is going to start their process. Since 1974, Congress has never accepted the president's budget. They don't usually even vote on it, though I will tell you Obama's last term, there was a ceremonious vote where all 535 people voted it down. I think you can kind of view it as a guideline, them saying this is what the president wants, but no Congress is ever going to just outright accept what the president says, but it should give them some kind of directive in terms of what the executive thinks they need. Then the Congressional Budget Office, remember we talked about them when we did our issues of Congress stations. They're going to go through from their perspective, and remember these are not members of Congress, these are policy wonks, they're people that work for Congress, and they're going to give economic projections to the budget committees. And they're doing that based on economic data. What do we think is happening with taxes, income, are we expanding, are we contracting, etc. By April 15th, Congress has to pass what are called budget resolutions. So the budget is broken up into categories. And the budget resolution, what that says is this is the max amount of money that we're going to allow to be spent in each of those categories based on what CBO has told us. So we heard from the president, we heard from our equivalent, so OMB is the executive, CBO is the Congress, and they're kind of equivalent, except that OMB is way more political and they're way more partisan because they're supporting the president, versus CBO, I think you can view them less in a partisan way and more just factual. So they're going to take that and they're going to say, okay, this is how much money we allocate for defense. This is how much money we allocate for Department of State, etc. And they'll go through and they'll do all of that. And then the House begins to go through the actual appropriations bills. So the budget resolution is like a goal. The appropriations bills is where they're going to go through line by line by line and they're going to allocate money for specific action. It's not so specific that it's like this amount of money for file cabinets, but it is money for categories of spending, so like operations, etc., like however it is they choose to break them up. The appropriations committees are going to have hearings, and just like the executive branch agencies had to report to OMB, now executive branch agencies have to report to the House Appropriations Committees and their subcommittees. So again, the Department of Defense is going to have to testify. Interest groups are going to come and testify. This is a huge, long process when they go through and they figure out, okay, here's about how much money we need to spend. Then we start to reconcile. And reconciliation means we're matching up our initial budget resolutions with what we've appropriated and saying, do we need to revisit something? Do we need to change something? The appropriations process is supposed to be done by June 30th, and those bills go to the president for his approval or disapproval. And theoretically, by October 1st, those bills should be passed. I will tell you that since this law was passed in 1974, Congress has never completely met their timetable. So never by October 1st have they actually passed. I feel like it's 13. I needed to look it up. I forgot. Congress has never passed each of the different budgeting bills. So what happens is if we make it to October 1st and we haven't passed that, we can pass what is called a continuing resolution. And the continuing resolution says we agree for 30 days or 60 days or whatever it is we choose to do, that for that amount of time, we'll continue spending money at the same rate. So your agency got X amount of money for the next 30 days, they'll still get that same percentage. So we have always had to pass one or more continuing resolutions. If we come to October 1st and the bill has not been passed, the budget for your part of the government has not been passed, and there is no continuing resolution, then that's when we encounter a government shutdown. And I know that you guys are familiar with that because you've heard of these have happened in your lifetime. So government shutdown means that all non-essential agencies that are funded by that part of the budget basically will close. So non-essential means like things that we don't have to have for our national security. So for example, somebody in the military might continue to work, like if their job is essential, but the payroll people for the military would not be essential. So you're going to work, but there will be a gap probably in when you're going to get paid. Certain people in the courts will work, but other people won't. So the job of the court is basically going to shut down. So I'm going to show you guys, after that, there's a video clip I want you to watch from a fictitious show called The West Wing that kind of shows you what a continuing resolution process might potentially look like.
Mr. Speaker, Senator.
I want to thank you, Mr. President, on behalf of my colleagues. None of us think this is a perfect deal. No one likes to see the sausage made, including the guys who make it. But this is an expression of willingness by both sides to keep all avenues open to an eventual resolution.
Yes, thanks, Robert, and thanks for saying it this time. I think I had to make that little speech the last time around. Or maybe the time before. This is our third CR, our third time coming up short. We got to do better. People aren't paying us to duck the hard choices. You want to run through the details, Angela?
An act of Congress. Continuing resolution to extend no later than January 3rd, midnight, to include a reduction by 1%.
Excuse me, Mr. President, I'm sorry. There's been a change. I know we talked about a 1% cut. It's going to have to be 3%.
Mr. Speaker, nothing like this was even mentioned, much
Hold
less...
on. I'm sorry we couldn't get more notice, but we just came from our conference, and I had significant opposition to only 1%.
Only 1%.
Yes, sir.
We had a deal at 1%.
But now my members have to go back to their districts for the holidays, explain why we kept the gravy train running with a rising deficit and an economy crying out for tax relief. It's an economic situation that calls for action, not status quo spending. A 3% may sound painful, but it's only for 2 months. It'll show we're serious.
What's next?
Sir?
In 2 months, 5%? 50? How many rounds did we go, Jeff? I'm just saying.
There is no next, sir. Not to get too technical, but this government runs out of money at midnight, and my guys are going home. This is it.
No.
There is no altering this offer, Mr. President.
And I said no.
Let's be clear, sir. We cannot, we will not vote to keep on footing the bill. You will be held responsible for shutting down the federal government.
Then shut it down.
Gong, gong, gong. Okay, so in this clip, obviously, the president was taking a really firm stance, but know that his decision would cause a federal government shutdown. In practicality, that doesn't really happen a lot. Now, I'm not saying that it never would by any means, but typically the reason that we reach some kind of government shutdown, that we can't pass a continuing resolution, is because the House and the Senate can't come to an agreement. It doesn't even usually get to the president. So I want you to think about that, and we're going to talk about that next class. Why do you think it's easier for Congress to make that kind of decision, not to have the bill passed and not to pass a continuing resolution versus the president?